I stood in that courtroom watching my husband Brad smirk like he'd already won the lottery. His voice boomed with disgusting confidence as he announced to Judge Harrison that he deserved half my millions, including my precious grandmother Eleanor's estate. The entire courtroom buzzed with shocked whispers. Brad gestured dismissively at me like I was some obstacle to overcome, but I remained calm, reaching into my purse for the sealed envelope I'd been carrying for weeks. Walking slowly to the judge's bench, I said quietly, "Your Honor, perhaps you should check this before making any decisions." Judge Harrison opened it, read the contents, and suddenly burst into uncontrollable laughter while staring directly at Brad. 3 months earlier, I never imagined I'd be planning for war in my own home. The sprawling colonial mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, had been my sanctuary since Brad and I married 5 years ago. Every morning, I'd sip coffee in the sunroom surrounded by my grandmother Eleanor's antique furniture, believing I lived in a fairy tale marriage. That illusion shattered on a Tuesday morning in March when I returned early from my book club meeting. The house felt different, somehow quieter than usual. I kicked off my heels in the marble foyer and padded silently across the hardwood floors toward Brad's home office. His voice carried through the partially closed door, but something in his tone made me freeze. "Trust me, Kyle, this divorce is going to be like winning the Powerball," Brad was saying to his brother. "Connecticut's got those 50-50 laws, and this woman's sitting on $40 million. Her grandmother left her everything, including 3 textile factories, 2 properties in Martha's Vineyard, and a portfolio that keeps growing." My heart hammered against my ribs. I pressed myself against the hallway wall, struggling to process what I was hearing. "But what if she fights it?" Kyle's tinny voice emerged from the speakerphone. Brad's laugh made my stomach lurch. "She's too trusting, too soft. Besides, I've been documenting everything for months, every expensive dinner, every vacation, every piece of jewelry I bought her. I'll show the court how I've been supporting this lavish lifestyle, how I gave up my marketing career to be her devoted husband." "You're a brilliant man. Sarah's going to love having all that money." Sarah. The name hit me like ice water. Brad continued talking, but his words became muffled as blood rushed to my ears. I stumbled backward, my hand flying to cover my mouth before any sound escaped. Over the following weeks, I became a detective in my own home. I discovered Brad's laptop contained saved searches about Connecticut divorce laws, asset division calculations, and something called lifestyle documentation. He'd been screenshot every bank statement, every investment report, every piece of financial correspondence that arrived at our house. The most sickening discovery came when I found his hidden camera equipment. Tiny recording devices tucked behind picture frames, a camera disguised as a phone charger in our bedroom, and software on his computer that tracked every keystroke I made on our shared devices. He wasn't just planning to divorce me. He was building a case to destroy me. I learned about his secret meetings with divorce attorney James Peterson, a man known for ruthless tactics in high-stakes divorces. Brad had been feeding him information about my family's wealth structure, my daily routines, even my conversations with friends. Peterson's strategy involved painting Brad as the supportive spouse who'd sacrificed his own ambitions for our marriage while I played the role of the cold, entitled heiress. But the cruelest revelation came through overheard phone calls with his brother. Brad described our most intimate moments with calculating detachment, explaining how he'd manipulated my emotions to gain access to family financial information. He bragged about memorizing the location of important documents, studying my grandmother's estate planning, and even researching the value of family heirlooms. "The best part is she actually loves me," Brad had told Kyle one evening while I listened from the kitchen. "She thinks I'm this devoted husband who just wants to support her dreams. Meanwhile, I'm documenting every luxury she takes for granted. The judge will see how accustomed she is to spending money and award me enough to maintain that lifestyle." That conversation revealed the depth of his deception. For months, Brad had been encouraging me to make expensive purchases, take elaborate vacations, and upgrade our already luxurious lifestyle. Every suggestion had been calculated to strengthen his eventual divorce case. The romantic weekend in Napa Valley, the new Mercedes convertible, the renovated gourmet kitchen, all of it served his plan to maximize his settlement. I discovered receipts hidden in his office drawer, carefully organized and labeled. He'd kept detailed records of every gift he'd given me, every dinner he'd paid for, every household expense he'd covered. To him, these weren't expressions of love, but investments in his future payout. The most chilling evidence was a folder labeled Ashland's Psychological Profile. Brad had been documenting my moods, my reactions to stress, my relationships with family members. He'd even consulted with a psychologist about how to present me as emotionally unstable during proceedings. His notes included strategies for triggering my anxiety in public ways to make me appear irrational, and plans to suggest I was mentally unfit to manage significant wealth. As I uncovered layer after layer of his deception, one thing became crystal clear. Brad hadn't fallen out of love with me. He'd never loved me at all. Our entire marriage had been an elaborate con game, and I was the mark. But as I sat in my grandmother's old rocking chair that night, staring at the evidence spread across my desk, I realized something Brad hadn't counted on. Eleanor had raised me to be stronger than I appeared, and if he wanted to play games with my family's legacy, he was about to discover that some women fight back. Eleanor's study remained exactly as she'd left it when she passed 3 years ago. Rich mahogany bookcases lined the walls, filled with leather-bound volumes on business law and philosophy. Her massive oak desk still held her favorite fountain pen and the brass magnifying glass she'd used for reading fine print. The room smelled of her lavender perfume, and old books, a combination that instantly transported me back to childhood afternoons when she'd taught me about managing money and reading people's true intentions. I'd come here seeking comfort, but what I found changed everything. While searching through Eleanor's personal papers for emotional solace, I discovered a locked drawer I'd never noticed before. The key hung on a delicate chain behind her portrait, hidden so cleverly that only someone who truly knew her would think to look there. Inside lay a collection of journals spanning decades written in Eleanor's precise handwriting. The entries revealed a woman far more perceptive than I'd ever imagined. She'd documented every significant relationship in our family, every business decision, every person who'd tried to take advantage of our wealth. The entry from my wedding day made my hands tremble. Ashlyn looked radiant today, but I cannot shake my concerns about Brad Harrison. He asks too many questions about the family finances, shows excessive interest in estate planning details, and his eyes calculate rather than love. He reminds me painfully of Richard, my first husband, who nearly destroyed everything my father built. I've arranged for a thorough investigation, but I pray I'm wrong about this young man. I'd never known Eleanor had been married before my grandfather William. The next several entries revealed a story she'd never shared with anyone. Richard Montgomery had swept her off her feet when she was 25. Much like Brad had done with me, he'd been charming, attentive, and seemingly devoted until he gained access to the family textile business. Within 2 years, he'd embezzled over $1 million and disappeared with his secretary. The experience taught me never to trust blindly again. Eleanor had written, "Love can make us vulnerable, but wisdom must always protect what generations before us built." The journals contain detailed observations about Brad from our very first introduction. Eleanor had noticed how his questions always centered on financial topics, how he steered conversations toward my inheritance, how he memorized details about family assets while showing little interest in family history or traditions. She'd even documented specific conversations that had raised red flags. But the most shocking discovery came in a sealed envelope marked for Ashlyn's protection. Inside, I found documents that took my breath away. Eleanor hadn't just been suspicious, she'd been actively investigating. Charles Morrison, our family attorney, had been instructed to conduct a comprehensive background check on Brad before our wedding. The file contained everything: his previous relationships with wealthy women, his patterns of financial manipulation, his gambling debts from college that had never been fully repaid, and most damning of all, evidence of an ongoing relationship with Sarah Martinez that had started just months after our engagement. The photographs were devastating. Brad and Sarah at restaurants I'd never been to, holding hands in hotel lobbies, shopping for jewelry that I'd assumed was for me. Bank records showed regular cash withdrawals that corresponded with expensive gifts for Sarah. Even more disturbing were transcripts of recorded conversations where Brad discussed his long-term plan with Sarah. "Once I get half of everything, we'll have enough to live anywhere we want," Brad had told Sarah just 6 months after our wedding. "She's so trusting, so grateful for attention. It's almost too easy." Eleanor's investigation had been thorough and professional. She'd hired retired FBI agent Patricia Collins to conduct surveillance, document patterns, and gather evidence. The file contained hundreds of photographs, financial records, and recorded conversations spanning our entire marriage. But Eleanor's most brilliant move was revealed in a separate document. She'd restructured her entire estate to include protective clauses I'd never known existed. If anyone married into the family attempted to claim assets through divorce under false pretenses, they would automatically forfeit any rights and face criminal prosecution for fraud. The inheritance had been designed as a trap. I learned from Richard that some people see love as an opportunity rather than a commitment. Eleanor had written, "If Ashlyn ever faces such betrayal, she'll have the tools to protect herself and future generations." The final journal entry was dated just weeks before Eleanor's death. "I've completed all necessary arrangements. If Brad proves to be the man I suspect he is, Ashlyn will discover the truth precisely when she needs it most. My investigation files are hidden where only she will think to look, and Charles has been instructed to provide additional evidence if needed. I pray I'm wrong about Brad, but if I'm right, my granddaughter will be ready for battle." As I sat in Eleanor's chair reading her words, I felt her presence so strongly it was as if she were sitting beside me. She'd known this day might come and had spent years preparing for it. Every protective legal structure, every documented piece of evidence, every strategic clause in the estate planning had been designed to catch someone exactly like Brad. But more than the evidence, Eleanor had left me something even more valuable: the understanding that strength isn't about never being deceived. It's about having the wisdom and courage to fight back when deception is revealed. I closed the journals and reached for the phone to call Charles Morrison. It was time to activate the protections my grandmother had so carefully constructed. Eleanor had given me everything I needed to turn Brad's own greed against him. The woman who'd raised me hadn't just been watching from beyond the grave. She'd been preparing for war. Charles Morrison's law office occupied the top floor of a converted 19th century mansion in downtown Hartford. The Persian rugs and antique furniture reflected the old money clientele he'd served for over 30 years. When I arrived carrying Eleanor's hidden files, Charles took one look at my face and immediately closed his office door. "Your grandmother suspected this day might come," he said quietly, settling behind his massive desk. "Patricia Collins is expecting your call." Detective Collins operated from a small office above a coffee shop, but her credentials were impressive. 25 years with the Connecticut State Police specialized training in financial crimes and a reputation for uncovering fraud that even sophisticated criminals couldn't hide. Eleanor had chosen her investigator well. "I've been monitoring the situation since your grandmother passed," Patricia explained during our first meeting. "The surveillance has been minimal, just enough to verify ongoing patterns. But based on what you've discovered, it's time to document everything thoroughly." Over the following weeks, Patricia's investigation revealed the true scope of Brad's deception. The evidence she gathered was methodical, devastating, and absolutely comprehensive. The affair with Sarah Martinez hadn't been casual or recent. Financial records showed Brad had been supporting Sarah since before our marriage, paying for her apartment, her car payments, even her credit card bills. Text message records revealed a relationship spanning our entire courtship period. While he'd been proposing to me with Eleanor's grandmother's ring, he'd been promising Sarah they'd be together once he secured their future. But the financial crimes went far deeper than I'd imagined. Patricia discovered Brad had systematically stolen from our joint accounts, disguising the theft through elaborate schemes. He'd created fake invoices for home improvement projects that never happened, billing us for services from companies that existed only on paper. The beautiful new landscaping I'd admired had cost half what Brad claimed. The kitchen renovation had been funded through inflated contractor bills, with Brad pocketing the difference. Most sickening was his theft of family jewelry. Pieces Eleanor had worn to formal events for decades had disappeared so gradually I'd barely noticed. Brad had been replacing them with high-quality fakes while selling the originals to pay gambling debts that now totaled over $200,000. The insurance claims he'd filed on lost pieces meant he'd been paid twice for the same theft. Patricia's surveillance revealed Brad's gambling addiction had escalated dangerously. He'd been visiting casinos in Atlantic City twice weekly, often driving down immediately after affectionate dinners, where he'd held my hand and talked about our future together. Security cameras showed him losing astronomical amounts on poker tables while Sarah waited in hotel rooms upstairs. The most disturbing evidence came from recorded conversations between Brad and his divorce attorney, James Peterson. They'd been planning character assassination strategies designed to paint me as mentally unstable, financially irresponsible, and incapable of managing inherited wealth. Brad had been coaching Peterson on my psychological triggers, explaining how to manipulate me during depositions to provoke emotional reactions that would support their narrative. The goal is to make her appear unfit to control family assets. Peterson's voice came through clearly on recordings. If we can demonstrate emotional instability combined with financial irresponsibility, the judge might award you control of the entire estate as the more stable party. Patricia discovered Brad had been spreading rumors about my mental health throughout Greenwich social circles. He'd been confiding in neighbors about my mood swings and marked irrational spending, creating a network of potential witnesses who would testify about my supposed instability. These conversations always happen when I wasn't present, allowing Brad to craft narratives without contradiction. But perhaps most calculating was his documentation strategy. Brad had been photographing family documents whenever I left them accessible, copying bank statements, investment reports, and legal correspondence. He'd even installed tracking software on my phone and laptop, monitoring every email, every search, every private conversation with friends or family members. The scope of his surveillance was breathtaking. Patricia found evidence that Brad knew my passwords for every account, had been monitoring my credit card spending in real time, and received notifications whenever I accessed family financial information. He'd been tracking my movements through phone GPS, knew everywhere I went and everyone I saw. He's been running a comprehensive intelligence operation against you, Patricia explained grimly. This isn't just about divorce settlement money. He's been gathering information to maximize his take while minimizing your ability to fight back. The final piece of evidence was the most shocking. Patricia discovered Brad had been consulting with a second attorney about potential criminal charges against me. He'd been exploring possibilities for accusing me of tax evasion, financial misconduct, even domestic violence. His plan involved filing countercharges designed to force me into a settlement to avoid prosecution. He's been building a case to destroy you completely, Patricia said, spreading photographs across her desk. Financial ruin, criminal charges, public humiliation. He wants to walk away with everything, while leaving you with nothing but legal problems. But as I studied the evidence Patricia had gathered, I realized Brad had made one crucial mistake. In documenting every aspect of his scheme, he'd created proof of an elaborate criminal conspiracy. The recorded conversations, the forged documents, the fraudulent insurance claims, the systematic theft, everything he'd planned to use against me would now be turned against him. Eleanor's protective legal structures were about to spring into action, but first Brad needed to complete his own destruction by walking into court and demanding exactly what the estate planning documents had been designed to catch: fraudulent claims against family assets. He has no idea what's waiting for him, Patricia said with a slight smile. Your grandmother was a very clever woman. Indeed she was. And Brad was about to discover that stealing from Eleanor's granddaughter came with consequences he'd never imagined. The Stamford family court building hummed with nervous energy that Monday morning in early October. Marble columns stretched toward vaulted ceilings, while anxious families huddled with their attorneys in the echoing hallways. I sat beside Amanda Walsh, my divorce attorney, watching Brad pace confidently near the courtroom entrance, with James Peterson whispering strategy in his ear. Brad looked like he was attending a celebration rather than a divorce proceeding. His new Armani suit probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, and his smile radiated the kind of confidence that comes from believing victory is inevitable. He kept glancing in my direction with what I can only describe as predatory satisfaction. Remember Ashlyn, Amanda whispered. Let him talk. Let him make his demands. The more he reveals about his expectations, the more rope he gives us. Judge Harrison entered promptly at 9 o'clock, his black robes billowing as he took his position behind the bench. Richard Harrison had presided over family court for 15 years, earning a reputation for patience with genuine cases and zero tolerance for fraud. His silver hair and stern demeanor commanded immediate respect from everyone in the courtroom. James Peterson opened with theatrical flair that would have impressed Broadway audiences. He painted Brad as the devoted husband who'd sacrificed his promising marketing career to support my emotional needs and family obligations. According to Peterson's narrative, Brad had been the stable force in our marriage, managing household responsibilities while I struggled with the pressures of inherited wealth. Your Honor, Peterson declared, gesturing dramatically toward his client, Mr. Harrison gave up lucrative opportunities in New York's competitive marketing landscape to provide emotional support for his wife's psychological challenges related to family expectations. Brad nodded solemnly, playing the role of noble sacrifice perfectly. When called to testify, he spoke with practiced sincerity about late nights comforting me through anxiety attacks, weekends spent managing household crises while I traveled for family business, and countless sacrifices he'd made for our marriage's stability. I never wanted recognition for these contributions. Brad lied smoothly. I simply loved Ashlyn and wanted our marriage to succeed despite the unique pressures she faced as an heiress. His testimony continued for nearly 2 hours, detailing his alleged sacrifices with the precision of someone who'd rehearsed every word. He described giving up a promotion at Morrison Marketing Group to accompany me on family trips, turning down consulting opportunities to manage our social calendar, and even claims about verbal agreements with Eleanor regarding his future security. Ashlyn's grandmother understood the challenges I faced. Brad testified, looking directly at Judge Harrison. She specifically told me that any man who could handle the pressures of marrying into this family deserved to be protected financially. Mrs. Eleanor Richardson assured me I'd never have to worry about my future security. This was a complete fabrication. Eleanor had barely tolerated Brad and certainly never made such promises, but he delivered the lie with such conviction that even I almost believed him. Peterson then presented their financial demands with breathtaking audacity. Brad wasn't just seeking half of our marital assets. He wanted 50% of everything I'd inherited, including Eleanor's textile factories, the Martha's Vineyard properties, and voting control of family investment accounts. Mr. Harrison contributed significantly to maintaining and increasing these assets during their marriage, Peterson argued. His business acumen and emotional support directly contributed to the family wealth's continued growth. The courtroom buzzed with shocked whispers. Even Amanda looked momentarily stunned by the scope of their demands, but Brad's arrogance was just beginning. When Peterson finished his opening arguments, Brad took the witness stand again with the confidence of someone who believed he'd already won. He elaborated on his sacrifice narrative, describing in detail how he'd managed our household finances, supervised property maintenance, and even contributed marketing expertise to family business decisions. I treated Ashlyn's inheritance as our shared responsibility, so Brad testified. Every decision about investments, property management, even charitable giving went through discussions where I provided guidance based on my business background. He was painting himself as a business partner rather than a spouse, establishing grounds for claiming ownership of assets that had been in my family for generations. The strategy was sophisticated and potentially effective if the court believed his version of events. But then Brad made his first crucial mistake. Emboldened by what he perceived as judicial receptiveness, he began expanding his claims beyond Peterson's careful script. Your Honor, I deserve these assets not just because of my contributions during the marriage, but because I've earned them through years of dedication to this family, Brad declared, his voice rising with righteous indignation. I gave up my prime earning years to support Ashlyn's emotional needs. I managed her grandmother's expectations about family legacy while protecting Ashlyn from psychological pressure she couldn't handle alone. Judge Harrison's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, but I caught the change. Brad was overplaying his hand, revealing the entitlement that Patricia's surveillance had captured so clearly. Furthermore, Brad continued, now fully committed to his performance, I believe I deserve immediate temporary support of $50,000 per month while these proceedings continue. Maintaining the lifestyle we built together requires significant resources, and I shouldn't be penalized financially while waiting for fair asset division. Amanda scribbled notes furiously beside me, documenting every outrageous claim. Brad's demands were revealing exactly the kind of greed Eleanor's estate planning had been designed to catch. As the first day concluded, I watched Brad shake hands with Peterson like they'd just closed a successful business deal. His confidence was absolute, his satisfaction obvious. He had no idea that every word he'd spoken was being carefully documented for purposes he couldn't imagine. But the most revealing moment came as we left the courtroom. Brad approached me directly for the first time that day, his smile cold and calculating. You should consider settling Ashlyn, he said quietly. Fighting this will only cost you more money and embarrass your family publicly. Take the deal we're offering, and we can all move on with dignity. It was a threat disguised as advice delivered with the kind of practiced manipulation I now recognized as his signature style. But what Brad didn't realize was that this conversation was being recorded by the device Patricia had given me. As I watched him walk away arm in arm with Peterson, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months' anticipation. Tomorrow would bring the moment I'd been preparing for since discovering Eleanor's hidden files. Brad thought he was winning, but the real game was just about to begin. Tuesday morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching the somber mood that filled the courtroom as proceedings resumed. Brad entered wearing an even more expensive suit than the previous day, his confidence so pronounced it bordered on smugness. He nodded to several people in the gallery as if greeting supporters at a campaign event. James Peterson had clearly coached his client overnight because Brad's testimony became even more elaborate and self-serving. He spent 3 hours detailing his alleged business contributions to the family wealth, claiming credit for investment decisions, property management strategies, and even marketing advice that had supposedly increased the textile company's profits. Under my guidance, the family businesses saw unprecedented growth. Brad testified with breathtaking audacity. I applied modern marketing principles to traditional manufacturing, resulting in profit increases that directly benefited the entire estate. This was completely false. I'd maintained complete control of all business decisions, and our company's success had continued long-established patterns set by my grandfather and refined by Eleanor. But Brad presented these lies with such conviction that I worried some people might believe him. His demands escalated throughout the morning. Beyond the 50% asset split, Brad now wanted ownership of our Greenwich mansion, claiming he'd personally managed its renovations and improvements. He demanded voting control of family business operations, arguing his marketing background made him better qualified than me to make strategic decisions. Ashlyn has many wonderful qualities, Brad said with practiced concern, but business management isn't among her strengths. She relies heavily on advisors and lacks the decisive leadership these companies require. The condescension in his voice made my stomach turn. This from a man who'd needed my financial support to pay his gambling debts and whose marketing career had consisted of junior positions he'd been fired from repeatedly. But Brad's most outrageous claim came after the lunch break. Peterson presented what appeared to be a handwritten document allegedly signed by Eleanor promising Brad inheritance rights if their marriage lasted more than 5 years. Mrs. Richardson understood that anyone who could successfully support Ashlyn through her psychological challenges deserved permanent family security, Peterson announced, holding up the document for judicial inspection. The paper looked authentic, complete with Eleanor's apparent signature and the official letterhead from her estate attorney's office. For a terrifying moment, I wondered if there were family secrets even I didn't know about. Judge Harrison examined the document carefully, while the courtroom held its breath. The forgery was sophisticated, clearly created by professionals who understood legal documentation requirements. If accepted as genuine, this single piece of paper could validate Brad's most extreme demands. This document appears to grant Mr. Harrison significant inheritance rights. Judge Harrison observed his tone neutral, but thoughtful. Mrs. Walsh, do you need time to authenticate this evidence? Amanda requested a brief recess to examine the document, but I could see concern in her eyes. The forgery was that convincing. When proceedings resumed, Brad's arrogance reached new heights. Emboldened by what he believed was documentary proof of his inheritance rights, he abandoned all pretense of humility. Your Honor, with respect to my late grandmother-in-law's explicit wishes, I believe these proceedings should focus on implementing her clearly stated intentions rather than relitigating my obvious rights to family assets. He was now speaking as if he already owned half of everything, as if the judicial process was merely a formality before taking possession of wealth his family had built over generations. I'm prepared to be generous, Brad continued magnanimously. Despite my legal rights to half of everything, I'm willing to settle for 40% of liquid assets, full ownership of the Greenwich property, and management control of the textile operations. This represents a significant compromise that honors both my grandmother-in-law's wishes and my wife's emotional attachment to certain family holdings. The sheer audacity took my breath away. Brad was positioning himself as the reasonable party making concessions while demanding to take control of my family's century-old business empire. But his final demand revealed the true scope of his greed. Additionally, Your Honor, I request immediate possession of the Martha's Vineyard estate. That property holds no emotional significance for Ashlyn, but represents my only chance to maintain the lifestyle Eleanor intended for me to enjoy. I've already spoken with real estate agents about necessary renovations and believe I can add significant value to that investment. He was discussing selling my family's beloved summer home before he even legally owned it. The property where Eleanor had taught me to sail, where 3 generations of family memories lived in every room, was nothing more than a liquid asset in Brad's calculation. Judge Harrison's expression remained professionally neutral, but I detected something shifting behind his eyes. Brad's entitlement was becoming impossible to ignore. Furthermore, Brad pressed on, now completely drunk on his own performance, I believe the court should award me temporary possession of certain family heirlooms while permanent ownership is determined. Items like jewelry, artwork, and antique furniture shouldn't remain in dispute when my inheritance documents clearly establish my rights. He was demanding immediate access to Eleanor's most precious possessions, pieces that had been in our family since before the Civil War. Brad saw them as negotiable commodities rather than irreplaceable links to our heritage. As his testimony concluded, Brad looked directly at me with naked triumph in his eyes. He believed he'd presented an unbeatable case, that his forged document and elaborate lies had secured his victory. I hope Ashlyn will accept these reasonable terms, he said with fake magnanimity. I have no desire to humiliate her publicly or damage the family reputation unnecessarily. The threat was clear: accept his demands or face public destruction. Brad thought he held all the cards, that his combination of lies, manipulation, and forged evidence had cornered me completely. But as I watched him return to his table with Peterson, both men radiating confidence and satisfaction, I felt the envelope in my purse containing Eleanor's real gift. They had no idea that every outrageous claim, every fraudulent demand, every expression of entitlement had been perfectly documented and was about to be turned against them. The trap Eleanor had set was about to snap closed, and Brad had walked directly into it with his eyes wide open, led by his own insatiable greed. As Judge Harrison prepared to call the next session, I stood and reached for my purse. It was time to honor my grandmother's wisdom and protect my family's legacy exactly as she'd planned. The courtroom fell silent as I rose from my chair, every eye following my movement toward the judge's bench. Brad looked puzzled, but not concerned. He probably assumed I was approaching to accept his generous settlement offer. James Peterson whispered something to his client, both men still radiating the confidence of certain victory. Your Honor, I said clearly, my voice carrying across the hushed courtroom. Before you make any decisions based on the evidence presented, perhaps you should examine this. I placed the sealed envelope containing Eleanor's investigation files directly into Judge Harrison's hands. The envelope bore Eleanor's personal seal and was marked Estate Protection Documentation in her distinctive handwriting. Brad's expression shifted from puzzlement to mild concern as Judge Harrison carefully opened the envelope and began reading. What started as casual judicial review quickly transformed into intense concentration as the judge's eyebrows rose incrementally with each page. Mr. Peterson, Judge Harrison said after several minutes of silent reading, could you and your client approach the bench for a moment? Both attorneys and Brad gathered around the judicial bench while I remained standing, my heart pounding, as Eleanor's carefully gathered evidence was finally revealed. Judge Harrison spoke in low, urgent tones, occasionally holding up documents for Peterson's examination. I watched Brad's face transform from confidence to confusion to growing alarm as pieces of Eleanor's investigation were disclosed. Peterson's professional composure cracked as he realized the scope of evidence against his client. Step back, Judge Harrison instructed firmly. Mr. Peterson, I need to examine this documentation more thoroughly before we proceed. As they returned to their positions, Brad looked genuinely worried for the first time since proceedings began. He kept glancing between Peterson and me, clearly trying to understand what had just happened. Judge Harrison spent the next 15 minutes methodically reviewing Eleanor's files, while the courtroom waited in absolute silence. The only sounds were pages turning and the occasional sharp intake of breath from the bench as particularly damning evidence was revealed. Finally, Judge Harrison looked up, his expression completely transformed from judicial neutrality to barely controlled outrage. "Mr. Harrison," the judge addressed Brad directly, "are you familiar with the penalties for perjury in Connecticut family court?" Brad's face went pale. "I'm not sure what you mean, Your Honor." "Let me be more specific. Are you aware that providing false testimony under oath constitutes a felony punishable by up to 5 years in prison? Peterson jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, if there are concerns about my client's testimony, we request an opportunity to review any new evidence and provide clarification." Judge Harrison's laugh was cold and sharp. "Clarification, Mr. Peterson. Your client has just spent 2 days lying under oath about virtually every aspect of his marriage, his contributions to family wealth, and his relationship with the deceased Mrs. Eleanor Richardson." The judge held up a photograph from Eleanor's files. "This image shows Mr. Harrison with Sarah Martinez at the Ritz-Carlton in Boston on his wedding anniversary last year. The timestamp indicates this affair was ongoing while he testified about his devotion to his wife." Gasps echoed throughout the courtroom. Brad slumped in his chair as his carefully constructed narrative crumbled publicly. But Judge Harrison was just beginning. "These bank records document systematic theft from joint marital accounts totaling over $300,000. Mr. Harrison used fraudulent invoices and inflated contractor bills to steal from his wife while claiming to manage household finances responsibly." More shocked murmurs filled the courtroom as the scope of Brad's crimes became clear. "This insurance documentation reveals false claims filed on jewelry that Mr. Harrison had stolen and sold to pay gambling debts. He collected insurance money on items he had personally taken from his wife." Peterson looked like he was witnessing his career end in real time. "Your Honor, we were unaware of these allegations and request time to investigate their validity." "Investigate their validity." Judge Harrison's voice rose incredulously. "Mr. Peterson, this envelope contains recorded conversations of your client planning this entire scheme. Would you like me to play his discussion with his brother about viewing this divorce as winning the lottery?" The judge activated a small recording device on his bench. Brad's voice filled the courtroom with devastating clarity. "Trust me, Kyle, this divorce is going to be like winning the Powerball. Connecticut's got those 50-50 laws, and this woman's sitting on $40 million. Brad buried his face in his hands as his own words echoed through the silent courtroom. "But perhaps most relevant to these proceedings," Judge Harrison continued relentlessly, "is this forged inheritance document you presented as evidence of Mrs. Richardson's intentions." He held up the fake document Peterson had submitted that morning. "This envelope contains the original correspondence between Mrs. Richardson and her attorney, specifically discussing how to protect her granddaughter from inheritance fraud. The document you presented was created by the same criminal organization that's currently under federal investigation for estate fraud in 3 states. Peterson was now visibly sweating. "Your Honor, my office received that document from my client. We had no knowledge of any irregularities." "Mr. Peterson, your office is facing immediate ethics investigation for presenting fraudulent evidence in family court. This case is being referred to the state attorney's office for criminal prosecution." Judge Harrison turned his attention back to Brad, who looked like he was about to vomit. "Mr. Harrison, the evidence in this envelope documents a comprehensive criminal conspiracy involving fraud, theft, perjury, and attempted inheritance scam. But Mrs. Richardson's most brilliant protective measure was this." The judge held up a legal document with Eleanor's official seal. "This estate protection clause automatically triggers when anyone attempts to fraudulently claim family assets through marriage. By demanding half of your wife's inheritance based on false premises, you have legally forfeited any claim to marital assets and subjected yourself to immediate criminal prosecution." The courtroom erupted in shocked whispers as the full scope of Eleanor's protection became clear. "Furthermore," Judge Harrison continued, "this same clause requires full restitution of any stolen assets plus treble damages. Mr. Harrison, you now owe Mrs. Ashlyn Richardson approximately $1.2 million in restitution and penalties." Brad stared in absolute shock as Judge Harrison delivered the final blow. Mrs. Richardson's grandmother apparently dealt with a similar situation in her first marriage and designed these protections specifically to catch inheritance fraud. Every demand you made, every false claim you presented, every lie you told under oath was exactly what this legal trap was designed to capture. Judge Harrison looked directly at Brad with unconcealed disgust. Sir, you attempted to steal from a woman who had spent decades preparing for exactly this scenario. Mrs. Eleanor Richardson may be deceased, but her protection of her granddaughter just sent you to prison. The judge's laughter echoed through the courtroom, but it held no humor. Court officers, please place Mr. Harrison under arrest for fraud, perjury, and attempted theft. Mr. Peterson, your client will be transported directly to Stamford Police Department for booking. As handcuffs clicked around Brad's wrists and he was led away in stunned silence, Judge Harrison turned to me with something approaching admiration. Mrs. Richardson, your grandmother was an extraordinary woman. This is the most comprehensive estate protection I've encountered in 15 years on this bench. Eleanor's trap had worked perfectly. Brad's greed had led him to demand exactly what the protective clauses were designed to catch, and his lies under oath had completed his own destruction. As I watched my former husband being led away in handcuffs, I felt Eleanor's presence so strongly, it was as if she were standing beside me. Her love had transcended death to protect everything our family had built. Justice had been served exactly as she'd planned. The click of handcuffs around Brad's wrists echoed through the silent courtroom, like a gavel marking the end of his elaborate scheme. As court officers led him away, his face showed a mixture of shock, disbelief, and dawning comprehension that his carefully planned theft had backfired spectacularly. The confident man who'd entered that morning demanding millions was now facing years in federal prison. James Peterson packed his briefcase with trembling hands, already knowing his legal career was effectively over. The Connecticut Bar Association would launch an immediate investigation into his role in presenting fraudulent evidence. Several other attorneys in the gallery whispered among themselves, recognizing that Peterson's reputation in the legal community was permanently destroyed. Judge Harrison addressed the courtroom with unusual directness. In 30 years of legal practice and 15 years on this bench, I have never encountered such a comprehensive case of marriage fraud. Mrs. Eleanor Richardson's protective estate planning represents the most sophisticated anti-fraud measures I've ever reviewed. Amanda Walsh gathered her files with obvious relief and professional satisfaction. Ashlyn, your grandmother essentially created a legal mousetrap that caught Brad exactly as designed. Every lie he told, every false claim he made, every fraudulent demand he presented was precisely what the protective clauses were designed to trigger. As the courtroom cleared, Detective Patricia Collins approached me with a satisfied smile. The state attorney's office will be filing additional charges based on our ongoing investigation. Brad's gambling debts, the insurance fraud, the systematic theft from your accounts, it's all documented thoroughly enough to ensure conviction on multiple felonies. The media attention that followed was intense but brief. Greenwich society had always protected its own from public scrutiny, and the story quickly faded from local news coverage. But within our community, Brad's attempted theft became a cautionary tale about fortune hunters and the importance of protective estate planning. Sarah Martinez, faced with evidence of her role in the conspiracy, cooperated fully with prosecutors in exchange for reduced charges. Her testimony revealed the extent of Brad's manipulation, including how he'd promised her a luxurious future, funded by my family's wealth. She received 2 years probation and mandatory restitution payments to cover her portion of the stolen funds. Brad's brother Kyle, who'd encouraged the scheme from the beginning, faced federal charges for conspiracy and money laundering. He'd helped Brad hide stolen assets and had been planning to assist with the fraudulent insurance claims. His construction business collapsed when his criminal involvement became public knowledge. The recovery of stolen assets took several months but proved surprisingly complete. Eleanor's investigation had been so thorough that law enforcement could trace virtually every dollar Brad had taken. The fake jewelry he'd replaced with originals was found in safe deposit boxes he'd rented under assumed names. Even the gambling losses were partially recovered through casino cooperation with federal investigators. 6 months after the trial, I received word that Brad had been sentenced to 4 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years probation. The judge in his criminal case specifically noted that his attempted theft from a widow showed particular callousness. that warranted maximum sentencing under federal guidelines. But the most meaningful resolution came through personal healing rather than legal victory. Cleaning out Brad's belongings from our Greenwich home, I discovered journals where he documented his true feelings about our marriage. The entries revealed someone incapable of genuine love, someone who viewed relationships as business transactions, and people as resources to exploit. Ashlyn's greatest weakness is her capacity for trust. He'd written just months after our wedding. She actually believes I love her, which makes manipulating her emotions remarkably simple. Women like her need to believe in fairy tale romance, and I'm happy to provide that illusion in exchange for access to generational wealth. Reading those words was initially devastating, but eventually liberating. Brad's betrayal hadn't been my failure, but his fundamental character defect. Eleanor had recognized this from the beginning and had spent years protecting me from exactly this kind of predator. I established the Eleanor Richardson Foundation for Financial Education, teaching young women about protecting inherited wealth and recognizing manipulation tactics. The Foundation's first seminar drew over 200 attendees, including many women who'd experienced similar betrayals. Sharing Eleanor's protective strategies helped other families avoid what I'd endured. Detective Patricia Collins became not just a professional ally, but a genuine friend. Her investigation skills had been crucial in exposing Brad's crimes, and her support during the legal proceedings had been invaluable. She now serves on the Foundation's board of directors, bringing law enforcement expertise to our educational programs. Charles Morrison, our family attorney, updated all estate planning documents to include even stronger protective measures based on lessons learned from Brad's scheme. These new protections have since been adopted by other wealthy families as the Richardson Clauses, creating a legal legacy that honors Eleanor's wisdom. The Martha's Vineyard property that Brad had planned to sell became my refuge during the healing process. Sitting on the porch where Eleanor had taught me about managing money and reading people's intentions, I finally understood the full scope of her love. She'd known that wealth could make me a target and had spent decades preparing defenses I'd never even realized existed. Most remarkably, I discovered that Eleanor had planned for my emotional recovery as well as my financial protection. Hidden in her study was a final sealed letter, marked "After justice is served." Her words provided exactly the guidance I needed. My dearest Ashlyn, if you're reading this, it means someone tried to steal what our family built, and you successfully defended our legacy. I'm proud of your strength, but know you're likely questioning your judgment about people and love. Don't let one deceiver destroy your capacity for trust. True love exists, but wisdom must always guide your heart. Eleanor's letter continued with specific advice about healing from betrayal, recognizing genuine character in people, and building relationships based on mutual respect rather than financial attraction. She'd even included contact information for a therapist who specialized in helping inheritance fraud victims recover emotionally. A year after the trial, I met Dr. Michael Thompson at a charity event for financial literacy education. He was a pediatrician who volunteered at free clinics, someone whose life was dedicated to helping others rather than accumulating wealth. Our relationship developed slowly, built on genuine friendship and shared values rather than romantic manipulation. When I eventually told Michael about my experience with Brad, his response revealed everything I needed to know about his character. He was angry on my behalf, but focused entirely on my emotional well-being rather than the financial details. He'd never asked about my inheritance, never shown interest in my family's wealth, and had actually tried to pay for our dates despite knowing I could afford anything. "Your grandmother sounds like an extraordinary woman," Michael said after hearing the complete story. "I'd have loved to meet someone wise enough to protect her granddaughter so thoroughly." Eleanor would have approved of Michael immediately. He possessed the genuine character she'd always hoped I'd find, someone who loved me for myself rather than what I represented financially. Brad's attempted theft ultimately strengthened rather than damaged my life. It taught me to recognize manipulation, appreciate genuine relationships, and understand the true value of Eleanor's protective love. Her wisdom had saved not just my inheritance, but my capacity to trust deserving people. The foundation continues to grow, helping other women recognize and defend against inheritance fraud. Every seminar begins with Eleanor's story, honoring her memory while protecting future generations from predators like Brad. Sometimes I wonder if Brad, sitting in his prison cell, finally understands that he didn't just try to steal money. He attempted to destroy the legacy of a woman who'd spent decades preparing for exactly his kind of attack. Eleanor's love proved stronger than his greed, and her protection continues long after her death. The greatest lesson isn't about money or legal strategy, but about the power of unconditional love to transcend death itself. Eleanor's gift wasn't just wealth, but wisdom, not just financial security, but the strength to fight for what matters most. As I write this from Eleanor's old study, surrounded by her books and her photographs, I feel her presence as clearly as when she was alive. Her protection didn't end with her death. It simply transformed into something even more powerful, love that prepares for every possibility, wisdom that anticipates every threat, and strength that endures beyond any single lifetime. Brad thought he was stealing from a naive woman who'd inherited more than she deserved. Instead, he discovered that some legacies are protected by forces stronger than any con artist can overcome. Eleanor's love had the final word, and justice was served exactly as she'd planned. Have you ever experienced a situation where someone's true nature was completely different from what they initially showed you? How do you think wisdom passed down through generations can protect us from people who might want to take advantage of our trust? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help others find it. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about justice, family wisdom, and the strength we find when we need it most. And please share this with anyone who might benefit from hearing about the power of protective love that transcends even death itself. Thank you for listening to Eleanor's story and mine. May you always be surrounded by people who love and protect you as fiercely as my grandmother protected me. Until next time, trust wisely and love bravely.